Welcome to a video tutorial on For Whom the Bell Tolls. This will serve as the first of two tutorials on For Whom the Bell Tolls. And it really, as the title says, it's a reading guide. I'm going to walk you through the trajectory of the novel, going through some of the major elements of the plot, and walk you through some key passages, all in the context of how this is the novel in which Hemingway finally creates a character that embodies all the elements of the Hemingway Code. If you were to read one novel to understand the Hemingway hero and the elements of the Hemingway Code, I would argue it should be For Whom the Bell Tolls. Robert Jordan is certainly one who's able to complete tasks well, embrace the present, value love, value nature, solidarity, all those things that strengthen the self, even though, as always happens, as often happens in Hemingway, the end goal is not necessarily achieved successfully. It's the process toward that goal in which the self is developed and the self is strengthened, and so we certainly see that in our hero, Robert Jordan, in this great Spanish Civil War novel. But I sort of have three objectives here. I want to walk you through the history, a little bit of the history of the Spanish Civil War as a precursor to World War II. And then I want to walk you through some of the plot elements, and then finally key passages and how they fit into the code principles. So by the end of this, you should have a pretty good handling on half of the book, maybe a third of the book, and then we'll finish the book in the second tutorial. So let's have a look. I like this the cover For Whom the Bell Tolls. This painting of the bridge there. The objective here is to blow the bridge and stop the nationalist, they were called, or fascist, as Hemingway calls them in the book, offensive, and to blow the bridge would keep them in the mountains and from further spreading south toward Madrid. And here we have two individuals here looking at the bridge and how to blow it, and that's Robert Jordan's task as he's given by General Goltz, a Russian general who supported the Republican cause. But before we get to all that, I want to give you some background on the Spanish Civil War and Hemingway's involvement with this. Here is a famous photograph taken by Robert Capa in 1936. This is the death of a Republican, literally being shot at the moment. You can see him throwing his gun away, and became a famous photograph capturing the horrors of the Spanish Civil War and how instant death can come. Let's look at some of the background so you understand why Hemingway himself supported the Republican loyalist cause and was very much against the nationalist fascist cause. So who were the Republicans? Well, a little background. The Spanish government was a democratically elected government in 1931 after a long monarchy from 1887 to 1931 and military dictatorship by de Rivera from 1923 to 1931. And so for the first time they had a constitution that required democratic elections, the vote, universal suffrage for all people, including peasants, religious freedom, separation of church and state, and education in the church, and protection of individual civil liberties. I mean, very much an American democratic cause here. The two interesting themes that came out of this democratic elected government in 1931, leading to the fascist nationalist resistance, was the agrarian law allowed peasants to own land, and was perceived as a threat to the wealthy landowners who were the nationalists. And the separation of the Catholic Church from education and the Catholic Church from government was opposed by the Pope and certainly opposed by the nationalists. And so those are two of the major themes that led to this fascist nationalistic resistance of this Republican, if you will, democratic republicly elected government. So who supported the Republicans? The United States did and sent the American Abraham Lincoln Brigade over there. The Soviet Union did, not necessarily for protection of civil liberties and democracy, but because they perceived Germany and Italy as a threat. Mexico sent many brigades over to support the Republican cause. So Republicans were seen ideologically as capitalist, as democratic, as a liberal democracy, and as secular. And Robert Jordan, our U.S. volunteer, like the many American volunteers who went over, was given a task by a Soviet commander, very interesting, a Soviet general, General Goltz, giving Robert Jordan orders to help the Republican guerrillas in the mountains of northern Spain to resist the fascist nationalist movement down toward Madrid. A classic Hemingway battle here. Obviously, he was always interested in war. And there's a great film called Hemingway and Gellhorn, his third wife, who was a war correspondent, Martha Gellhorn, and she was deeply interested in covering the Spanish Civil War. And Hemingway left his second wife in Key West in Florida to join Martha and cover the Spanish Civil War that led to this, what I argue is one of his greatest novel, published in 1940. Actually finished it here in Sun Valley, room 206 at the Sun Valley Lodge. So more on the Nationalists. Who were they and what were they interested in? The Nationalists were conservative, deeply religious, Catholic. They favored a required citizenry that would be Catholic. They favored national security from the threats of other nations. Obviously, they had no problems with the military dictatorship nor the monarchy. They were anti-communist, the Soviet Union, and they were land-owning wealthy class. And so the agrarian law was a great threat, that the fact that peasants could then own land, to their ability to maintain their social economic status. So it was a military coup to restore national security and protect the Catholic Church, among other things, and protect their own social class, that led to this 3-year war. I should say, to not miss the obvious, the nationalist cause was victorious in the Spanish Civil War, and Italy and Germany's support for the nationalist cause had a lot to do with its victory, and obviously led to the onset of World War II. The Pope rejected the separation of church and state and separation of church from education. And so here we have, they're supported by fascist Germany and Italy. It was a proxy war for World War II between the Allied and Axis powers, the Allied powers being the United States and Britain, and the USSR, and the Axis powers of Germany, Italy, joining the nationalist cause in Spain. Well, the victory led to General Franco's dictatorship until 1976. And so we have a reign of Franco here from 40, really, to 76. So 36 years of Spanish dictatorship was a result of the failure of the Republicans to resist the nationalist victory. 300,000 people died in this war, 120,000 Spanish civilians. And there are some really, really tragic and hard passages to read in this book about the sort of barbaric killing with scythes by the fascists, and of just Spanish civilians. And so clearly we're on the side of the underdog here. Americans reading from the Voltaires are on the side of republicanism, of civil liberties, of separation of church and state. So a lot of ideas in here that led Hemingway to write the book and led Robert Jordan to support this cause. And so the main characters, and there are many that I've left out, but most of them are guerrilla fighters in the mountains. They're important and will be discussed. But the main characters are Robert Jordan, our American volunteer, to support the Republican cause. Maria, who he falls in love with, who was raped by the fascists. Pilar, the great gypsy of the mountains. Lives in caves, and she's a very strong woman, a very strong personality, sort of a Robert Jordan counterpart, if you will, in the female. General Goltz, who gives Jordan the order to blow the bridge. And Selmo is, as we see in a lot of Hemingway's books, is a coded mentor for Robert Jordan. He's one who knows he needs to complete his task well, even though deep down inside he knows that they may not win, they may not be victorious, but that doesn't prevent him from fighting for the right side and doing what he needs to do well. Pablo is the foil to Robert Jordan. He is leader of the guerrilla band, if you will, of fighters before Robert Jordan gets there, and he's given up on the Republican cause. He believes in it, but he doesn't believe they should blow the bridge. He believes they should hide in the mountains and hope to survive themselves, and he rejects the blowing of the bridge because he believes that will only incite more violence and create an imminent threat to their safety and survival. Augustine is a guerrilla fighter who Robert Jordan befriends. Kashkin's an important foil for Robert Jordan as well, because he is a Russian soldier who joined the Republican cause and actually was unable to. He blew a train, and in retreating from it, either was killed himself or did kill himself out of fear of being captured. So he is what Robert Jordan hopes he will not be. El Sordo, last two, is a leader of another guerrilla army up in the mountains in Spain. El Sordo means deaf, and he is murdered along with all of his fighters in a brutal battle in this book. And Kharkov is a Russian journalist who befriends Robert Jordan, is definitely on his side. So the most important characters that we're going to talk about are Jordan as our coded hero, Maria as a coded hero, Pilar as a coded hero, and Anselmo as a coded mentor for Robert Jordan. Now we'll look at some of the code principles just to remind us of the 10 code principles. All of them are repeatedly developed in this novel, and they are all achieved by Robert Jordan himself, but there are other characters, as I circled above, that embody them as well, like Anselmo and Pilar and Maria are all able to run orders through chaos and live by a self-imposed way of being that strengthens them. Okay, to review some of the code principles that find their expression in Robert Jordan throughout the novel and some of the other characters, Pilar and Anselmo and others. But just a quick review here. Speaking through actions, right? Convey what you believe by how you act, not by what you say. Avoiding self-pity. Robert Jordan never worries about not being able to win the war or achieve the end of blowing the bridge well. He knows he's going to pour himself into the process. He strengthens himself from completing tasks well. He finds some strength in recognizing the natural beauty of the mountains where he is in Spain. Clearly the love relationship with Maria, he's faithful to her and deeply in love with her, even though it only lasts for 3 days. He develops experiential knowledge and values others who have developed experiential knowledge. He takes responsibilities for his wrongs and for his shortcomings in the task of blowing the bridge. A big one in this novel that is recurring is embracing the present. You are what you do now, not what you have done or will do. In the face of adversity, hold on to your enduring faith in yourself without despair. Certainly Robert Jordan lives in the moment and knows that the self is defined by action in the present. He self-assesses. He does what he does. He values what he does well and doesn't overvalue or the praise given to him by others. And certainly solidarity, surrounding himself with General Goltz and Anselmo and Maria and Pilar as code followers, as people who are fighting for the right cause, and who live by a self-imposed ethical standard. He learns a lot from them and finds strength by being with them. But let's do a quick overview. So that's helpful, just a reminder of all the code principles that are working throughout the novel. But before I get to a couple of the quotes to inform the novel, well, let's start with that. Let's look at this passage that comes from For Whom the Bell Tolls. It says, "Clearly I miss him," H being God, "having been brought up in religion. A man must be responsible to himself." So out of the context of those code principles, here we have this commentary that, yes, I miss God and God's presence in guiding one through life, but now man must be responsible to himself. Must be responsible to self-assessing, to living by a self-imposed way of being in order to create order in this world of chaos and war and despair. And then another famous quote from the novel, I think it's helpful in framing the argument that Hemingway makes that Robert Jordan is a coded hero, is this. He says, "How little we know of what there is to know. I wish that I were going to live a long time instead of going to die today." This is at the very end of the novel. "Because I've learned how much about life in these 4 days, more, I think, than in all other time. I'd like to be an old man to really know. I wonder if you keep on learning or if there's only a certain amount each man can understand. I thought I knew so many things that I know nothing of. I wish there was more time." So it's hearkening back to that letter, that excerpt from a letter that I referred to in a previous video tutorial, where he says, it takes a lifetime of learning to learn the simplest things of life. And it is man's great heritage to leave to others what one has learned. And so this is really, I read this passage here and that excerpt from the letter as Hemingway's comment that this is what I've learned from being involved in World War I, being involved in the Spanish Civil War. Remember, he traveled over there and actually fought a little bit for the cause, and chasing German submarines in his boat Pilar. I think it's significant that he named his marlin fishing boat Pilar down in Key West. And he was always fascinated by war as a context where one can project one's morality onto a scene, into a reality when death is imminent. And so here we have this heritage that he leaves us of what he's learned about life and learned about being surrounded by people who are coded in this novel. Okay, let's before we get into some of the passages that will move us through the plot of For Whom the Bell Tolls and develop some of the themes in the code principles, I'd like to talk give you a general overview of the novel now that you've finished it. Robert Jordan, obviously volunteer for the Republican cause, has been given orders by General Goltz to blow this bridge to stop the fascist nationalist descent toward Madrid, and he's supposed to join these guerrilla Republican fighters who are really gypsies up in the mountains, led by Pablo and certainly also by Pilar. And so he joins them. He finds Goltz to be a very strong character who commits himself to the cause and says, you don't need to overthink things, it's in the doing, and when it's in the doing that one proves oneself. But just a brief overview. So he joins the guerrilla fighters up in the mountains, and immediately they get the sense that Pablo is a dissenter. He doesn't think that blowing the bridge will be good. He'd rather just hide in the mountains. And no one else agrees with this, and Pilar thinks that he is weak for thinking that way. And so, Robert Jordan knows he's going to have a problem with Pablo, and he certainly does as the plot goes on. And so he, befriends Anselmo and Augustine and Fernando and others, and he studies the bridge, and he studies the sentries who the fascist sentries who are guarding the bridge, so that they will be able, so the Republicans will be able to, so that the nationalist fascists will be able to come down across the bridge. And so the whole book is centered around this one moment of being able to blow the bridge. Well, we learned some background about Maria, who Pilar has taken under her wing. Maria has been raped by the fascists. Robert Jordan falls in love with her. Their love is very intense, only lasts for 3.5 days. But nonetheless, he feels that he's loves her completely, and she feels the same way. And then there's some recollection of the fascist offensive in Pablo's town, or in a town where Pablo was involved, that led to the rape of Maria. And there's a recollection of Kashkin, his blowing of the bridge, and the retreat, in which Kashkin is killed. All of this is not very good foreshadowing for the future of Robert Jordan. But then there's another great current battle, if you will, no recollection here, where the fascists destroy El Sordo, a leader of another guerrilla army in the mountains, and there's a beheading of all the dead, and Robert Jordan witnesses this. And the lieutenant commander for the fascists, Robert Jordan knows, and who will come back later, watches him behead the deceased from Sordo's army or band of guerrillas, and that will come in later in the novel. And so it all works toward, after the offensive on El Sordo, Robert Jordan decides to call off the blowing of the bridge and send orders back to General Goltz in Madrid that they should call off the offensive. And by the time the message gets there, it's too late. The blowing of the bridge is in process, and the planes have already been sent up. As soon as he sees the Republican planes, Jordan knows that's his cue to blow the bridge, and the planes have already been sent, so it can't be held back. And Robert Jordan is able to blow the bridge and kill the 2 sentries, but in the blowing of the bridge, shrapnel from the bridge and from the bombs went into Anselmo and killed him. And so the great leader, great coded mentor, is killed by this blowing of the bridge. Robert Jordan escapes on horseback. I should say before that, Pablo has dissented from the group before the blowing of the bridge and stolen some of the explosives, because he doesn't believe that they should do it. And so Robert Jordan has to blow the bridge with fewer explosives, and I think that led to the danger of it, and it made it more dangerous, and ultimately led to the killing of Anselmo. And in the fleeing, Robert Jordan on his horse breaks his leg. The horse breaks his leg and goes down, or the horse goes down because he's shot, and Robert Jordan's leg is broken, and he knows he can't continue on, but he wants to fight long enough to protect Maria and Pilar and others, and in doing so, he sees Lieutenant Commander Fascist, I think it's Bernardo, I'll have to go back and look that up, I think it begins with a B, coming toward him, and here he is, like in the beginning of the novel, on the pine forest floor. He's on the pine forest floor again with his heart beating, waiting with his machine gun to kill the fascist lieutenant commander, and the book ends there. And so here he is, giving himself up to the process, giving himself to completing tasks well, blowing the bridge, protecting Pilar and Maria and the others, and allowing them to escape, and doing so well, even though we know the larger historical context here is that the Republican cause in Spain fails, and the fascist nationalists win, and dictator General Franco rules until 1976. Let's look at some of the passages. That's sort of the overview. Valuing solidarity in completing tasks well and embracing the present are 3 major code principles here, and alongside the most prominent one, which is to value love for as long as it lasts, being faithful to and in love. But here's Anselmo right away. He had to decide whom to trust. You had to trust the people you worked with completely or not at all, and you had to make decisions about the trusting. He was not worried about any of that. Robert Jordan trusts the man Anselmo so far in everything except judgment. He had not yet had an opportunity to test his judgment, and anyway, the judgment was his own responsibility. And so this is important here to recognize that who to trust is important, and recognizing people who live by an unspoken code, who complete tasks well, who don't wallow in or eddy in their own weakness is a great line from this book. And he sees a mentor in Anselmo, someone who doesn't like the killing of war, but he sees the necessary cause in doing so. We've talked about General Galtz giving orders and knowing it's important to blow the bridge and knowing it's important to protect the Republican cause. Then we have Pablo rejecting this blowing of the bridge, pitting himself in his future demise. He's a code breaker. He's unable to commit himself to action. The quote for Pablo here is, he wants things as they are for his own weakness. He wants to stay in the eddy of his own weakness, right? And so he wants things to stay as they are and hide in the mountains and not incite any violence from the fascists. And Robert Jordan only finds that to be a foolish idea because they're going to come and get them if they don't blow the bridge. But he also sees Pablo as lacking courage and lacking a commitment to action. I've already talked about Kashkin as the former officer, Soviet officer assisting the Republican cause, dying in doing so, foreshadowing Robert Jordan's death in trying to help the Republican cause. And Anselmo makes this comment early on, 16 and 17. You can look it up in the text as we're going through these. That feeling good in life is like a feeling of immortality, and I think that's what Hemingway was all about. And when you live your life by these code principles and you're guided by this self-imposed need to follow a way of conducting yourself, you've gained a ability to control life in a way that is empowering, that is ennobling, and has a feeling of immortality to it, or at least has a religious feeling to it, to use the phrase from A Farewell to Arms. Completing tasks well, we talked about as an important code principle here. And he looks at the bridge for the first time, and he says this. He was watching, the narration is this. He was watching the bridge again, and in the sudden short-termness of the little light that would be left, and studying its construction. The problem of its demolition was not difficult. As he watched, he took out a notebook from his breast pocket and made several quick line sketches. As he made the drawings, he did not figure the charges. He would do that later. Now he was noting the points where the explosive should be placed in order to cut the support of the span and drop a section of it into the gorge. It would be done unhurriedly, scientifically, and correctly, with a half a dozen charges laid and braced to explode simultaneously, or it could be done roughly with two big ones. That's an interesting foreshadowing of what actually occurs. They would need to be very big ones on opposite sides and should go at the same time. He sketched quickly and happily, glad at last to have the problem under his hand, right, to impose order on chaos, glad at last actually to be engaged upon it. So those are my italics. So here we have the desire to blow the bridge well. He knows how to do it correctly and scientifically with a half a dozen charges. But clearly when Pablo dissents and takes the charges, the explosive charges away, he only has two left. And in doing so, he does it roughly, and he winds up killing his coded mentor, Anselmo. But the point here is that he's pouring himself into the task. He's losing himself in the process. He's losing himself in his confident ability to complete tasks well. Anselmo has some interesting language, and we'll talk about later, about the need to kill at war, that no one feels good about killing at war. And there's a wonderful passage where Robert Jordan recognizes that the sentries on the bridge are just like him. They believe in the cause that they've been taught to believe, and that they would be friends outside of this inane war. And so there's a need to cleanse oneself after the killing, and there's that desire to get strong in the broken places that we saw in Sun Also Rises. Anselmo, on page 41, exhibits the idea that after the war we're going to have to do some penance in this life to cleanse ourselves. But let's continue on. Let's keep moving through. Now, being faithful to and in love, the most prominent code principle in this novel. It's a commitment to love that will provide a religious feeling and may lead to faith in self and the world, and clearly it does in this novel. On 160, Robert feels he could die while in love with Maria and be satisfied. In the 70 hours left before blowing the bridge and a retreat force an intensity to their love And it's classic Hemingway, the context of Catherine Barclay and Frederick Henry and Farewell to Arms adds an intensity to their love that didn't last that long, but he's glad he committed himself to it. There's an intensity to love between Maria and Robert Jordan. And so here's Pilar on this love. She says, if you love this girl as much as you say to, you'd better love her very hard and make up in intensity what the relation will lack in duration. You have 2 nights. 2 nights to love, honor, and cherish, for better, for worse, in sickness and death. This is actually Robert Jordan commenting on the love. And so you can live a life, as one of the arguments in this, and learn all there is to learn about this life in 3 days, in 70 hours, if you live intensely, if you live with great passion. Here's a more interior monologue here about this relationship with Maria. I'd like to have it for my whole life. You will, the other part of him said, you will. You have it now, and that is all your life is, now. There's nothing else than now. There's nothing, neither yesterday, certainly nor is there any tomorrow. How old must you be before you know that? There is only now, and if now is only 2 days, then 2 days is your life, and everything in it will be in proportion. This is how you live a life in 2 days, and you stop complaining and asking for what you will never get. You will have a good life. A good life is not measured by any biblical span. So here we have a mixture of valuing the love that he has and embracing the present. That one can get as much out of a 3-day relationship as one can in a lifetime relationship. Seems odd to us outside of the war context, but when death is imminent and death is likely, I think a love can be, love clearly is much more intense and much more sustaining. And another thing, don't ever kid yourself about loving someone. It's just that most people are not lucky enough to ever have it. You never had it before, but now you have it. What you have with Maria, whether it lasts just through today and part of tomorrow, or whether it lasts for a long life, is the most important thing that can happen to a human being. There will always be people who say it does not exist because they cannot have it, but I tell you it is true, and that you have it, and you're lucky even if you die tomorrow. And so, here's Hemingway being explicit about the code principle, that it is the most important thing that can happen to a human being is to be in love and to love intensely and have that love returned. And clearly we see that in Robert Jordan and Maria's relationship. Well, another code principle here is avoiding self-pity. Don't wallow in regret that you are being destroyed, if you will, by this war or by other external forces you can't control, because others are as well. And he says this to himself: if you stop complaining and ask for what you will never get, you will have a good life. Take what you have and do your work, and you have a long life and a very merry one. Commit yourself to the cause, commit yourself to what you believe in, commit yourself to the process regardless of the ends. And if you're in love, commit yourself to that love. And so clearly we see that in completing tasks well and desire to blow the bridge. This is another under the rubric of completing tasks well. He talks about the religious feeling, if you will, that he gets from being able to complete tasks well. Right? We're looking, right? Remember the opening quote? Yes, I do miss him, but all we have in this life now is a responsibility to the self. And a responsibility to the self can bring a religious feeling. So here we have, you felt, in spite of all the bureaucracy and inefficiency and party strife at war, something that was like the feeling you expected to have and did not have when you made your first communion in church. It was a feeling of consecration to a duty toward all of the oppressed of the world, which would be as difficult and embarrassing to speak about as religious experience. And it was as authentic as the feeling as you had when you heard Bach, or when you stood in the Chartres Cathedral, or the cathedral at Lyon, and saw the light coming through the great windows, or when you saw Montaigne and Greco and Bruegel and the Prado. It gave you a part in something that you could believe. Gave you a part in something that you could believe by committing yourself to a consecration of duty. Believe in wholly and completely, in which you felt an absolute brotherhood with the others who were engaged in it. key passage. It was something that you had never known before, but you had experienced now, and you gave such importance to it, and the reasons for it, that your own death seemed of complete unimportance, only a thing to be avoided because it would interfere with the performance of your duty. But the best thing was that there was something you could do about this feeling and this necessity too. You could fight. Arguably one of the most important passages to understanding, embracing the present, completing tasks well, this consecration to a duty, believing in the cause, and committing oneself to the process has created a feeling that he was looking for, the religious feeling that he was looking for, that he never got at his first communion. And notice the connection to a performance to duty, embracing the present, completing tasks well, but also valuing solidarity, the brotherhood that comes from joining with others, committed deeply to a just cause. More on avoiding self-pity and fear as paralyzing one, and paralyzing and preventing one from being able to act. Robert knows it will betray others and self if he does not blow the bridge. So he's got this solidarity now to Anselmo, to Pilar, to Maria, to the Republican cause, and he needs to do it. Pablo regrets killing fascists, right? He's drunk and talking about all the fascists he's killed, and he regrets it for what it has done to him psychologically. So here he is, an example of an uncoded person who pities himself and pities the psychological despair from the killing, and he just wants to hide, so he's not committed to action anymore. And really, most of the guerrillas in the mountain want Robert Jordan to kill Pablo, and he doesn't. And you could argue that's one of his flaws, because it led to the bad blowing of the bridge, which led to the killing of Anselmo, which led to ultimately Robert Jordan's broken leg, which led to his own death. But he was very wary in killing Pablo because he felt that it might incite a rebellion among the others, or at least among those who still follow Pablo. But Pablo comes back. This is important before they blow the bridge, and he says, I'm not going to join you. And then everyone's like, well, you're going to have to kill him. And Robert Jordan does not, and Pablo comes back and says, okay, I'll join you. But a careful reader knows that when he says that Pablo is only rejoining the Republican cause because he doesn't want to be killed himself. He does things out of self-interest, not out of a consecration to duty, if you will. Speaking through actions. It's the first code principle, and avoiding false abstractions. We remember from A Farewell to Arms that one of the great passages tells us that the words like honor and sacrifice and hallowed behavior have no meaning in war. Only the names of places and rivers and towns and battalions and numbers of troops mean anything to the true soldier. And so in this great passage in 169, Robert talks about how much he hates phrases like enemies of the people and righteousness and continence that are used by the fascists. And he, like Krebs and like Frederick Henry, looks to reject all of the false abstractions that occur at war. Let's look at some more code principles. Embracing the present. Do not live in the past nor the future. Live now. Commit yourself to the now. As we said, he had 70 hours. So if your life trades 70 hours, he ruminates, I have that value now, and I am lucky enough to know it. And if there's not any such thing as a long time, nor the rest of your lives, nor from now on, but there is only now, then now is the thing to praise. And I am very happy with it. So embracing the moment that he has now and not longing for the victory, a Republican victory, or longing for life with Maria after the war. This is Anselmo on talking about the need to embrace the present and the killing at war, but knowing that there will be a great penance for doing so. I hope I am not for the killing, Anselmo was thinking. I think that after the war there will have to be some great penance done for the killing. If we no longer have religion after the war,
when I think there must be some form of civic penance organized, so that we may all be cleansed for the killing, or else we'll never have a true or human basis for living. So for me, this is getting strong in the broken places. This is being able to know and take responsibility for one's wrongs, necessary wrongs. The killing is necessary, I know, but still, the doing of it is very bad for man, and I think that after all this is over and we've won the war, there must be a penance of some kind for the cleansing of us all. And this really makes Anselmo ultimately, one of the great coded heroes in all of Hemingway's literature, because he knows what he needs to do, and he kills not with pleasure or not with great vengeance, but he kills knowing it's a part of the process in pursuing the Republican cause, but also that he will have to complete tasks well, contribute to others, and value the solidarity with others in the future in order to have a cleansing for all the killing that he's done. As opposed to Pablo, who regrets his killing and won't kill anymore and wants to just hide, Pablo is described as just a coward, and that was the worst luck any man could have. Well, here is, one of the great passages about Robert Jordan committing himself to the present and committing himself to the task at hand of blowing the bridge. This was the greatest gift he had, the talent that fitted him for the war, the ability to ignore, not to ignore, but to despise whatever bad ending there could be. This quality was destroyed by too much responsibility for others or the necessity of undertaking something ill-planned or badly conceived. For in such things, the bad ending, failure, could not be ignored. It was not simply a possibility of harm to oneself, which could be ignored. He knew he himself was nothing, and he knew death was nothing. He knew that truly as he knew anything. In the last few days, he learned that he himself, with another person, could be everything. There's that consecration to duty and brotherhood that comes from committing yourself to a just cause. But inside himself, he knew that this wasn't the exception. That we have had, he thought, and that I have been most fortunate. That was given to me, perhaps, because I never asked for it. That cannot be taken away nor lost. But that is over and done with now on this morning. And what there is to do now is our work. So I love this passage because it's a deep commitment of a consecration to duty and blowing the bridge, knowing deep down, if one really contemplates the situation, that it will most likely result in failure, but nonetheless not letting that be a barrier to action. Knowing that it may result into failure, may result in defeat, does not prevent him from Robert Jordan completing a task well as best as he possibly can. It's a wonderful thing to take with you after you finish For Whom the Bell Tolls. It's a wonderful thing to take with you in life, is that don't let the reality that one might not be successful in any endeavor prevent you from trying and doing it as best you possibly can, because there is honor in that, and there's dignity in that, and there's a strong self that's developed from that. A couple more passages and we'll end this video tutorial with completing tasks well and embracing the present. There's nothing else than now, he argues. There's neither yesterday, nor is there any tomorrow. How old must you be before you know that? There is only now, and if now is only 2 days, then 2 days is your life, and everything in it will be in proportion. This is how you live a life in 2 days. And if you stop complaining and asking for what you will never get, you will have a good life, and a good life is not measured by any biblical span, as we talked about earlier. Dying was nothing, and he had no picture of it, nor fear of it in his mind. So, kind of working on two levels here. Dying is nothing, meaning there's nothing after death, and dying is not a thing to prevent one from action. But living was a field of grain blowing in the wind on the side of a hill. Living was a hawk in the sky. Living was an earthen jar of water in the dust of a threshing, with the grain flailed out and the chaff blowing. Living was a horse between your legs and a carbine under one leg, and a hill and a valley and a stream with trees along it on the far side of the valley and the hills beyond. So here's his definition of how to embrace the present. Living like a hawk in the sky for survival. Living was being of a place and reacting to the place, like the field of grain blowing in the wind. So two natural images. Everything in nature is fully alive in the eternal present. Living is drinking a jar of water after you've worked hard and brought the grain in. Living was mounting up on a horse and going and committing yourself to a cause you believe in. This is what strengthens the self. This is what Robert Jordan is considered one of the great Hemingway heroes. Thanks for listening. We'll finish the rest of the novel with some key passages and code principles in the next video tutorial.